Hello and welcome to another video from Dazatron's Diorama Llama, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make an Easter Island base. So for this make you're going to need a piece of styrofoam roughly 4 inches by 5 inches. I think this is about 5.5 inches. Again, as in previous makes, you can glue together some polystyrene to kind of build up the size that you need. So we're looking at Easter Island. So this is a small volcanic island in Chile where there's lots of these heads kind of sunken into the ground, and there's a big mystery behind it. People aren't really sure exactly how they got there, or what they symbolize, or that kind of thing. So but they're kind of like these guardians of this island. And the reason why I've chosen to use Easter Island is because I wanted to make a base using some sort of kind of statue. I've seen lots of other dioramas, particularly when you can buy these really expensive kind of statues from different companies, and lots of them have some sort of kind of carved head. But carved heads are particularly difficult to make. However, the Easter Island heads are quite simple, really. So I thought they might work. So although I do usually aim my videos at beginners, I would say this is more of an intermediate level. So just be aware of that. So you can see I've kind of drawn out this kind of rough kind of, I suppose, dustbin kind of shape. It's quite slender. The nose is quite long, as you can see. I've marked out where, I suppose, where the arch would be. So if you've got like an oblong shape and then it's got an arch on top, and where the arch meets the oblong, that would be where the eye line would be situated. And then I'm just marking on the side of the styrofoam as well where the main features are, like the chin, the mouth, the nose, and the eye line. And that's just going to help me when I come to draw in the profile. So I'm just going to add in this kind of triangular shape. I suppose it'd be like a half triangle for the nose. Just using those lines as a guide. On this kind of diagonal line for the lip. And then I'm just drawing where the chin would be. So they're nice and angular, these heads. So it does again make it quite easy to draw and to sculpt. So just got another little diagonal line there on the top of the nose, just where your eyes would be. And then I'm just going to mark in that kind of curve, or that arch shape. And I'm just adding in the chin there. So I've got a rough kind of profile shape there. Now I'm just going to mark in the ears. The ears again are quite long, so they go from the eye line or just above to just below the nose line. And that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much my kind of area marked out. Now I've just had another look at the heads using Google, and you can see there on that image that they're actually much more slender looking at them from the side. So I'm just going to just make the top of the head a bit more narrow. That's going to make that nose a bit more prominent, which is what we want. So just changing the shape slightly. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. So I'm also going to mark in the top. Again, looking at the profile already drawn in, so I can see where I need to cut. And I'm just using the electric wire cutter and looking at the profile to just kind of get a rough cut. So again, this isn't the final cut. This is just to get the, I suppose, the initial shape marked out. So very carefully, I'm just pulling the wire cutter forwards and backwards to kind of create that shape. I'm also not cutting right up until the line itself that I've drawn in, just so I've got a bit of a buffer there in case I make a mistake. And just doing the same again for the bottom half of the face. I know you can't see what I'm doing there very well, but you can see the results of that. And although it's not exactly neat, it's not exactly symmetrical, Again, this is just a rough cut. So I've pretty much got my kind of profile in place there. So the next thing I need to do is to mark in again the front of the face. So just using a Sharpie or a felt tip pen, I'm just going to draw again the nose. Just marking out where the eyes would be, marking out that kind of top arch, and then marking out that kind of oblong shape and just where the mouth would be. So it is pretty much just, as I said, a rectangle with an arch on top. So I'm using the wire cutter now just to cut down the sides. And I've just cut a little bit more away from the eye, and I'm also just shaping the top of the kind of the forehead and the chin and the neck as well. So now I just need to make that nose more prominent and to kind of cut away the cheeks. So I'm not using the cutter for this because it'd be too difficult. So I'm just using the floristry knife, and I'm just cutting a line down where the nose would be, and then from the side where the cheeks would be. So I'm just kind of cutting that away from 2 angles. And it is worthwhile just checking back to the source material, and I'd encourage you to do that if you have a go at this, is just to get a couple of pictures of the Easter Island heads, get a side profile and a front view, and that would just give you something to kind of work from. So again, I'm just using the floristry knife just to shape it a little bit more, cut away any rough edges, kind of push back the chin if I want the nose to kind of stick out a little bit more. I could kind of shape the forehead a bit easier and kind of curve the sides as well. So I've just got this kind of V shape there that's kind of sticking out from the mouth. This is a very simplified mouth. We're not trying to create a kind of a detailed head here. This is a very kind of simple head. So I'm just marking in where the ends of the mouth would be. So you can see just slightly wider than the nose, and I'm just kind of marking out there the bits that I want to remove. And exactly the same as we did with the nose, I'm just going to cut down the sides of the mouth and just remove those 2 little pieces on each end. So I'm just marking in the chin now, and I'm just going to use the wire cutter just to pull out the neck a little bit more, just so that kind of chin is again a bit more prominent. And I'm just using the floristry knife just to cut into those lines, so it just gives a bit more shape to that chin. It just adds a little bit more detail there. So just cutting from 2 angles, again a bit like a little V shape. And just keep doing that until you're happy. So I'm just kind of smoothing out some of those areas there that I wasn't too happy with. Just trying to make that a bit more of a gradation, so it doesn't kind of just go flat and sink in really quickly. So there's pretty much my finished rough cut. So from here, I just want to start to, I suppose, add a little bit more detail and just get it looking how I want it to look. So again, I want the nose to stick out a little bit more, so I've cut away a bit more of the chin. I'm also going to mark in the ears now. And of course, the ears should stick out a little bit. So again, just a reminder, the ears go above the eye line, right down to slightly below the nose. And I'm just drawing a line over the top of the forehead there, so I can make sure that both ears are roughly in the same place, so it's reasonably symmetrical. And exactly the same as we did with the nose and the mouth, and just cutting a line down the side of the ear, and then I'm going to cut in at an angle to kind of make that ear kind of stick out a little bit. There we go. So I'm just kind of pulling away part of the cheek there, and instantly that would give the impression that the ear is kind of sticking out. Now I don't want the ears to be too prominent, so we don't need to kind of carve in too much, but again it just adds a bit of shape, a bit of detail. Just adding a bit more shape there around the eyes. This is a bit tricky when you get to the kind of curved parts, but the same process really. You just kind of draw a line with your knife around the ear and then cut into it at an angle so it kind of appears that it's sticking out. And then finally here, I'm just using the wire cutter at the back just to pull away the back part of the head. And I just want that more kind of diagonal shape right at the bottom, just where the neck would be. And then I'm using a small file just to smooth out. I don't want it really smooth. You know, this is meant to look like it's, you know, ancient. It's been around for thousands of years, so we don't want it to be too smooth. Keep all, you know, some of the little niches and cracks and things like that we made just in the process. So these are just the offcuts. So I'm just using the wire cutter just to kind of shape a few larger rocks, which I'm going to use around the statue on the base itself. So you could just use a floristry knife for this, but it's just easier using the wire cutter just to get rid of some of the bigger sections, and then you can work back into it with the floristry knife a bit later. So again, you know, keep everything, so you can see there, these are all made from those offcuts. I'm not using a new piece of styrofoam. I'm just trying to reuse what I've already got there on the table. And then I'm just using the floristry knife here on some of the smaller rocks because it's a bit easier to manage. And again, I'm just shaping them a little bit more. This won't be the final cut. This is just to get a rough, again, a rough cut, a rough idea what the shape would be, so I can put them in place and just see how it's looking. You don't want to start spending too much time on detail at this stage, as you want to just see if it's going to work as a base, because it might be that you don't need all the rocks that you've made, or you might need to make some more drastic changes. So it is worthwhile just doing a rough cut, checking it out, putting a figure on top, and then just seeing how it works. So you can see here I've got a 2-inch piece of styrofoam for the bottom of the base. I'm just marking out roughly a section there so I can fit all the bits on that I want to use. And again, keep all your offcuts. Hopefully you've checked out my last video where I made the slate, was it the mined slate diorama base, using all those kind of offcuts. So yeah, do keep hold of all your bits because you can use them again. So this is what I was talking about, just putting a figure on top, putting the different features in place, just gives you a really good idea if it's going to work. And actually, as I did that, I realised the base was too big. There's too much going on there, so I'm just going to shrink that down. And also felt that the statue was a little bit too tall, so even though it's on its side, I wanted it to feel like it's kind of sunk into the ground over all these kind of thousands of years. And if you do see pictures of Easter Island, you'll see lots of statues like that where they're literally kind of sunk into the ground. So I'm just using the wire cutter just to cut away the lower part of the head. So again, it was a good job. I didn't add all that detail, so I'm not getting rid of hours and hours of work here. So I'm cutting just slightly below the nose, as you can see there, but probably about a centimetre below the nose. and it just isn't going to stand at all then, so I think it's going to work better as a whole. So for the grass, now I haven't used grass in any of my dioramas before, and I know you can buy lots of fake grass from kind of Hobbycraft and places like that. But I found, I purchased this kind of brush just from a hobby store, DIY store, for £1.50 I think it was. So very cheap, and I'm just cutting off a bundle of the what do you call it? It's not wire, is it? But yeah, just a little bundle off there. I'm putting a bit of masking tape around it. You could just use scissors, or I've used side cutters. So I'm just putting a bit of masking tape just to hold the bristles in place. That's the word I was looking for. And then just using a pair of scissors just to kind of straighten up the bottom. And I'm just using a hot glue gun just to put a little bit of glue around the edge and the bottom of the bundle, and that would just hold all the bristles in place. And then if you just put it to one side, it does help to elevate it a little bit so it doesn't stick to any surfaces. And you can see these ones have dried off, so just make as many as you think you need. And then once it's dry, remove the masking tape, and you should see that those bristles are quite firmly in place. If there are any loose bits, you can just kind of remove those. So we're just going to put those in place. So the idea is that these kind of grasses are kind of growing in between the rocks. Now that's looking a bit tall at the moment, so I just need to cut that down a little bit more. So again, just using a pair of scissors. So I'm actually almost cutting this in half. Now it could be that you actually put a bit of masking tape around those offcuts, and you could have a smaller kind of grass section. You could do that. And then I'm just cutting into one side of the bristles just to kind of thin them down a little bit, so it doesn't look like a bunch of bristles. And you can see that just looks a bit more natural. So after putting those back in place, I think they look a lot more effective at that kind of scale. So now I'm just going to kind of, I suppose, create a bit more detail in the side of the base itself, make it look a bit more like a rock face, just so it ties in a little bit better. Again, don't think that this is really difficult. It's not. Just keep cutting away at the styrofoam, different angles. Chip away at the styrofoam as well. You don't want nice kind of smooth cuts. You want all those kind of little to use a Bob Ross phrase, all those little happy accidents that you get just as you kind of cut away at things. So I've done that all around the side of the base, and then I'm just placing my main features now, deciding what I want and where. And just take a little bit of time over this just to figure out, does it look the way you want it to look? Are you happy with it? If not, you can easily move things around at this stage. Now I do want to put a few rocks at the back as well, because this is a 3D base. The idea is that you can turn it from different angles. And it's up to you really how much or how little you put on here. So I'm reasonably happy with that. So I'm just marking out now where these rocks are going to be placed. And it is worthwhile doing this, because as you start to add more features and start to kind of paint things up, you will kind of lose where you wanted these things to go. So I've also placed an arrow as well, just to remind me which direction I want the rock to be placed as well, because again, as you make these things, there's often a good angle. So I'm just using the rod tool on the electric foam cutter just to kind of melt a little hole. I'm not going all the way through the base. I'm just making like a little shallow kind of hole there, just so it sits inside. And then I'm just using this kind of wire tool just to rough up the surface, give a bit of texture. So you do want to kind of press in quite hard and kind of scratch the surface, and that would just give it more of a kind of a realistic effect. Again, these wire tools you can pick up from kind of DIY and kind of hobby shops, really cheap. I'm talking probably £2 or £3 for a set. And do exactly the same for the little rocks that you've made. And just a quick tip here with the grass, because sometimes when you've made a bundle there's quite a lot in there, so just by cutting them in half once you've used the glue gun on the end, you can just kind of extend your use of those really, so you don't have to make so many. So I put all the little grass areas in place, and I just want to see if my statue still fits, and yes it does, so I'm quite happy with how that works. And again, the grass just adds that little bit extra texture and that bit extra realism. And it is worthwhile as well with the grasses not to have them all the same height. And just another tip really, if you did want to paint them, if you just use some of the kind of the Games Workshop or the Vallejo paints, which is just kind of thin down acrylic, or even thin down acrylic with water yourself, and just paint that green if you did want kind of green grass instead of the brown grass that I've used. I just think the brown looked better overall in the end, so that's why I went with that colour. And this is the same method that you've seen me use many times. I'm just using regular acrylic paints. Again, don't pay expensive for these. I've got burnt sienna, which is that kind of reddish brown. I've got a yellow ochre, which is kind of the golden colour. And I've got a bit of black and a bit of white. And so I've just kind of mixed some of the red kind of burnt sienna with the black to do an initial base coat. And I'm using a mixture of the yellow ochre, the golden colour, and the kind of reddish brown, which is the burnt sienna, just over the top, just a bit of dry brush, or very light, kind of a light touch of the colour on top. There for this bit, excuse me, is just to, again, just add a bit more kind of realism. Often with kind of rocks you get kind of, is it kind of mildew and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of, I've watered down some white acrylic and really watered it down, so you want it really loose. And I'm just kind of splattering that on the top by just tapping the top of the brush close to the model itself. As you can see, it kind of sticks out a little bit too much when you first splatter it, so you just want to soften that just by dabbing your finger over the top. And it really does make a difference to the overall texture and kind of surface quality. And if you just do the same all over, on all sides and the back as well, it would just add a nicer finish to the piece. You could also do that with a bit of green, again watered down, just to make it look like almost kind of moss is growing on the top. It just works quite well. And then for the rocks, I've just used a dark brown as a base coat, and then I'm just going to use a kind of a lighter grey just to kind of dry brush those. Again, quick tip, if you've put acrylics out and you don't want to waste them, just cover them with foil and they can be used again. So this isn't the finished base, but again, it's just to give me an idea. Am I happy with how it's looking? Is there anything I've spotted that I'm not too happy with? And so I just need to add a texture to the very bottom, so kind of like a kind of a soil kind of finish. You'll have seen me use this technique before with the Thunder Tank base. If you haven't watched that, I would advise you to check that out. And really easy method. You're just going to take some acrylic paint, so again that kind of burnt sienna colour, a little bit of black, just mix that up. You're just going to add a bit of the yellow ochre, and then you just want to put in a big generous blob of PVA glue. It was a little bit light, so I've added a bit more black. And again, you just keep mixing that until you're happy. I've then added some of the, this is kind of like the dust from the styrofoam. So as you saw, styrofoam, you get lots of these kind of little bits that come off there. So I've just kept all of those, mixed it in with the paint and the glue, and that creates a really nice kind of soil kind of texture. So it is worthwhile again keeping everything, because it will come in. So I'm just using an old brush just to kind of dab that in place. This bit is quite tricky, particularly if the texture of the kind of soil is quite dry. You do have to kind of really dab it down to get it to stick, but you also don't want it to be too wet, because it would end up like kind of looking too shiny, and I wanted it to look quite dry. So I've done the same all over. Notice I've only added the soil in between where the rocks would be and the statue. I haven't added it all over the base. If you wanted to add it all over, you could. It's up to you. But now I'm just adding a bit of the kind of Loctite super glue, which I'm using just to hold the statue and the rocks in place. I mean, to be fair, if you did use the soil mixture, if you had enough of it all over the base and then put the rocks and the statue on top, the PVA should hold everything in place once it goes off. You would need to leave it for a good 24 hours, but that should work. But I've just used the Loctite glue because it just dries a bit quicker, and it just means I haven't got to leave it quite so long before I do my next step. So it's just a bit easier for me when I'm doing these tutorials. It is worthwhile pressing down the statue and the rocks for a good kind of 3 or 4 minutes if you're using the super glue, just to make sure that it's got a good kind of strong connection. And then I'm just using the floristry knife again, just to kind of fill in any gaps that I may have missed when I did the first layer of soil. So now I'm just adding a bit of a kind of a dark grey acrylic base to the sides, so I can then dry brush the sides and just bring out the texture again of the rocks. It is worthwhile leaving that soil mixture to go off a little bit, so I'd certainly leave it a good few hours before doing this stage. You could just leave it overnight as well. In fact, you can see me in my dressing gown here. So this is the following day. So I'm just using a dark grey mixture just for the base coat. And you always do want to have a darker colour underneath and then go lighter on top. And that would just again bring out the texture of the material. So now I'm just using a very light grey, almost white, drying off most of it to just kind of pick out the tops. So you're not getting to all the details here, you're just kind of picking out the raised surface of the sculpt. And here's my finished base. And I'm really, really pleased with this. I think the grasses work really well. I really like the statue. I like the kind of mottled effect from the paint on the top. I think that works really well. So yeah, I'm quite happy with this as a whole. And one of the things I do want to show you with these bases is how versatile they are. Often I do have a figure in mind when I make these bases, but there's many a time where I don't really. I just have an idea for a base and think it could work for many kind of franchises or toy lines. So yeah, just to show you kind of what I mean by that, just a few different characters that you could use. So from Motu to Transformers. I do quite like the idea of using the kind of the sea kind of characters, as if they kind of discovered this island. That works quite well. I think it looks really cool with kind of dinosaurs. So kind of Beast Wars Megatron looks great. And I think it just goes to show as well, a larger figure works well on this base as well as a smaller figure. But even something vintage So I do love my kind of Micronauts and Microman at the moment. So even these look quite cool just in place. And then we've got Mumra from the Thundercats. Again, a larger figure. It's nice when you got more than one figure as well. And even Rock Lords, or maybe not quite Rock Lords. It doesn't work quite so well. Maybe a couple of them would work better. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I do hope you have a go. As I said, it's a little bit more difficult, but actually not as difficult as you might think. So I would encourage you, have a go. I think you might surprise yourself. And yeah, see what you can come up with. And whatever you collect, I know somebody got in touch saying about Marvel Legends. Again, I think Marvel Legends would work really well on top of this. So yeah, do have a go. Thank you for watching. Thank you to all my new subscribers. I've passed the 300 subscribers mark now, so I'm really pleased with that. Do like and subscribe, and do keep tuning in, and I'll see you again soon. Bye then.